Good evening and welcome to Soapbox Tonight, where reality bends, terror plots loom, and some members of Congress treat murder like a paperwork glitch. You know, you really do have to admire the cosmic sense of humor lurking in international sports scheduling. So, out of all the teams on planet Earth, someone somewhere pulled two names from the celestial hat for the big pride-themed friendly match. And what they got was Iran and Egypt. Now, you don't need a PhD in geopolitics or theology to appreciate the comedy here. This is the kind of matchup where both teams' national mottos might as well be, "We do not do this." And yet, here we are, booked to run around a field in front of a giant rainbow banner like they're performing in a 1990s Target commercial. It's like that moment back in the Qatar World Cup when rainbow flags were allowed into stadiums, but only after being carefully chaperoned like diplomatic contraband. So basically, yes, you may bring your symbol of inclusion so long as it does not actually say anything that would make us uncomfortable. And now we're watching the same kind of cultural traffic control here at home. You're learning once again that inclusion very often means very selectively including whichever worldview currently outranks the other on the identity priority list. And honestly, you could not script a better opening for tonight. Because there's a strange superstition floating around modern culture. It's kind of an ideological ghost story that you should be terrified of anything ending in archy. Hierarchy, bad. Patriarchy, even worse. Monarchy, practically Voldemort. For reasons no one has clearly explained, the only acceptable archy these days seems to be anarchy, which is apparently cool again as long as you hashtag it. Now, what's funny is that people object to hierarchy in theory, but live their lives in it by practice. Sports have hierarchy. Jobs have hierarchy. Friend groups have hierarchy. Even the line at the grocery store is a tiny, temporary hierarchy. And we're all grateful it exists so the oranges get scanned before the ice cream melts. People say that they want inclusion, but inclusion without hierarchy is impossible. If you include person A who believes thing X and person B who passionately believes not X, you inevitably have to decide whose rules will govern that space. Congratulations, that decision is a hierarchy. And that's why this whole conversation keeps looping back to the same point. You cannot abolish hierarchy. You can only pretend not to see the one that's already running the show. So tonight, we're going to talk about a crime so small it fits into your hands, yet it has been so absurdly underpunished it makes your head spin. So meet Zoe Rosenberg, the so-called activist, in reality criminal, the so-called activist who walked into a Purdue Farms processing plant and walked out with 4 chickens, and somehow then walked out of court with only a simple slap on the wrist. Yes, 4 chickens, that's right, 4. In a plant that had tens of thousands of animals, federal regulations, sanitation protocols, and of course, once she left, thousands of dollars of damages waiting. Now let's break this down. Sneaking into a federally regulated poultry processing plant is not like swiping a Snickers bar at CVS. One person in the wrong area of that processing plant triggers full sanitation of the plant, disposal of products potentially contaminated, production stoppages costing thousands of dollars, and of course this violates worker safety protocols, food safety inspections, and more. In short, this was not a rescue mission. This was trespass. This was theft. and this was costly disruption. This is the kind of thing ordinary shoplifters often see heavier punishments for than this person got. Yes, you heard that right. A shoplifter in a retail store caught with a few $100s of goods can sometimes face more jail time than Rosenberg got for sneaking into a high-security industrial plant. And let's be honest, if you're going to claim you're rescuing animals, why only 4? Why 4 out of tens of thousands? By her own warped standards, she left most of them to suffer. In her own ethical universe, she's a villain, and she didn't even have to get creative to rescue more. Once again, we're seeing a broader pattern. This is not an isolated quirk. Across the country, we see ideologically motivated destruction of private property. Campus riots with property damage and chaos. We see posters torn down just because someone felt uncomfortable. And we see these so-called activist groups sneaking into farms, labs, and production sites. Private property is one of the pillars of Western civilization. If it is suddenly optional, if your ideology says it's okay to ignore it, there's something wrong. And the courts, well, sometimes they're just too lenient. The media, of course, they love to call these thieves activists. If we can't enforce the law evenly, the message is clear. Commit a crime, claim a righteous cause, and maybe you'll walk away easier than a kid caught shoplifting at CVS. And here's another truly frightening part of this. These are not toy chickens. This is not a toy industry. These are parts of the food supply chain. Walk into the wrong spot, leave contaminants, you risk thousands of dollars in damages, you risk illness to thousands of people, and you risk undermining the security of food production. Ask yourself what happens when someone decides the next step is to do something worse. Perhaps to sabotage, perhaps to poison, perhaps to harm, because they see it as righteous activism. That's the logical consequence of treating ideology as an excuse for criminal behavior. And that is a threat to all of us. So tonight, let's be clear. Trespass, theft, and disruption are crimes. Ideology does not make them noble. 4 chickens, tens of thousands left behind, thousands of dollars lost, federal food regulations violated, and the public watches as this is called activism. This isn't just a story about chickens. This is a story about private property and about the rule of law and about the erosion of common sense in the face of ideology. And remember this, when the law punishes you differently based on your cause, and the media frames criminals as heroes, the pillars of Western civilization start to wobble, and it's up to us to notice before they fall. And following along in the natural progression of what happens when we allow criminals to get away with things under the guise of activism, federal authorities have said they have stopped a coordinated terror plot targeting New Year's Eve celebrations across Southern California. 4 people have been arrested, accused of planning bomb attacks timed for the holiday. According to investigators, the devices were never deployed, but materials were allegedly being prepared, and the planning had advanced far enough federal prosecutors decided to step in. This was not a spontaneous act. Authorities describe it as organized, deliberate, and ideological. Planning documents, test runs, specific targets. In other words, not noise, not chaos, but intent. The FBI says the suspects were taken into custody before anyone was hurt, and that matters. It's the system working exactly as it should. Intervene before bodies are counted, not after. Look at the behavior. Strip away the labels. Planning explosives, picking targets, timing attacks for a public holiday. That is not protest. That is not activism. That is not symbolic disruption. That is terror, plain and simple, whether it succeeds or it fails. And here's the point. When we hesitate to call things what they are, we create the space for excuses, the space for minimization, and the space for future actors who are taking notes. Example of this same thing tonight. By now, I'm sure everyone is aware of what happened at Bondi Beach. On the first night of Hanukkah in Sydney, Australia, a Muslim terrorist attack struck a Hanukkah celebration at Bondi Beach. What should have been a night of joy for over 1,000 attendees turned into horror and chaos. 2 Muslim gunmen opened fire on families celebrating the Jewish holiday. At least 12, and I've got to go back and check, but I believe right before going on air, I saw where it's up to at least 16 people have been killed, including children and community leaders. Over 30 others were injured, including police officers. The identity of the attackers? Well, you could probably guess it. One suspect has been identified as a Pakistani national. Both of these actors have been identified as father and son, and of course, they're both Muslims. The investigators are exploring connections to extremist networks. Yeah, I'm sure there'll be plenty. Authorities have also found explosive devices linked to the attack, confirming this was a coordinated terrorist operation. And I'll go on to say that obviously, since they found explosives that weren't used, they intended to do more. This is not an isolated incident. Across the world, Jewish communities have been repeatedly targeted for violence. We have seen it time and time again in our own country. We saw the poor Jewish person who was doused and lit on fire. We have seen them attacked over and over. The Jewish couple at the consulate who was killed. And tonight we see once again that Muslims are free to carry out murder in Western countries, while governments do nothing to prevent it. We see security failures, lack of preparedness, and open border policies that have repeatedly left innocent people vulnerable. Western societies are not compatible with ideologies that sanction murder simply because of someone's religion or ethnicity. This Muslim ideology, this death cult ideology, has no place in free democratic societies that value human life and liberty. Western governments must wake up and act decisively to protect citizens from this deadly ideology. The Australian government and governments across the West must recognize that this threat is real, ongoing, and lethal. Have you ever had one of those moments where you watch a congressional hearing and you think, there is no way he actually said that? Then you rewind it, and sure enough, he actually did. Word for word, no mistaking it. So here's what we're talking about. We are talking about Democratic Congressman Benny Thompson calling the terrorist ambush of 2 National Guard members a unfortunate accident. Those are the exact words he used. He called it an unfortunate accident. Not an attack, not a murder, and not an act of terrorism. He called it just an unfortunate accident. Like somebody bumped into a mailbox with their car. Now, I've got to tell you, when you listen to the tone, when you watch the clip, when you see how casually that phrase rolls off of his tongue, It does not come across as a mistake. It does not sound like someone who misspoke. What it does sound like is someone who genuinely sees your life, your people, your service members, and you as nothing more than collateral noise. Because to him, to that wing of the party, the real tragedy isn't that a guardswoman was murdered. No, the tragedy is that in their world, is that the story is politically inconvenient for them. And when that's your worldview, well, guess what? Everything then becomes unfortunate. Everything becomes complex. Everything becomes unclear. Not because it actually is, but because if you change the language, then you can change the reality. And this is the playbook of the modern left. Riot becomes mostly peaceful. Illegal border crossing becomes irregular migration. Crime wave becomes economic desperation. And terrorist ambush becomes an unfortunate accident. I'm going to say it one more time. An unfortunate accident. Well, you know, Mr. Congressman, that I don't even remember your name now because you're so irrelevant and you've already scrolled off of my screen, but Mr. Congressman, who I don't remember, Bernie Mac, whatever you are, let me tell you this. How would you like to sit down face to face with the parents of that guardsman? Why don't you tell her mother and father that her cold-blooded murder was an unfortunate accident? And he had the nerve to say unfortunate accident with a straight face. The whole left does. They have the nerve to say these things with a straight face, to tell you that riots are mostly peaceful with a straight face. They will tell you that crime waves are simply economic desperation with a straight face. And these monsters will look you in the eye and tell you that the death of this guards person was an unfortunate accident. Because once they twist these words enough times, people will stop noticing that they're being lied to. This is not about compassion. This is about control. When you control the language, you control the narrative. If you control the narrative, well, you can pretend the problems you created, they don't exist. But let me tell you the part that really made my jaw hit the desk. After all this, that congressman had the nerve to try to reclaim his time. Yeah, how about if the whole U.S. reclaims our time from you? This is the government equivalent of punching someone in the mouth and saying, "Ow, you hurt me." This is a member of Congress abusing a rule designed to protect witnesses and twisting it into a weapon to silence one. So let's be real clear what was seen in the video. We have a Democratic lawmaker minimize a terrorist attack by calling it an unfortunate accident. The murder of a guardsman, an unfortunate accident. I'm terribly sorry, Mr. and Mrs. Parent of that guardsman, but according to this Democratic lawmaker, your child's murder was merely an unfortunate accident. He then uses softened, sanitized languages and refuses to let the truth be spoken. Then abuses procedure to shut down the witness he just questioned. I don't know about you, but to me that sends a very loud and clear message. These people are not out here fighting for you. These people are out here fighting for their own narrative. These people are out here fighting for their own image. These people are out here fighting for their own power. They do not care about you. You are simply an unfortunate accident. Because what happened to those National Guard members, to them on the left, it's not a crisis. It's not an outrage. It's not a national emergency. To them, it is simply an unfortunate accident. And if that doesn't tell you how out of touch that side has become, then nothing will. And it's time now for our headline roundup, a quick look at some headlines you might want to go back and give a second glance to. Up first, Nicki Minaj versus Gavin Newsom. California Governor Gavin Newsom's communication director sparked some controversy after calling Nicki Minaj a crude insult online following her criticism of some of his policies. U.S. jobs report for November. U.S. employers added 64,000 new jobs in November. There were gains in healthcare and construction, and those were offset by some declines in manufacturing and leisure. Amidst a report like this, pretty typical. Some sectors are going to thrive and some are going to lag. It's not a crisis, just the way our economy always works. U.S. oil and gas production is at a record high, led by Texas. Texas now accounts for over 40% of national crude production. It's no real big surprise. Texas has long been a powerhouse of U.S. energy, and efficiency gains keep production climbing. Cadillac is returning as the title sponsor at Doral. Cadillac will once again sponsor the Cadillac Championship at Trump National Doral. This marks a decade since the last sponsorship. Corporate sponsorships coming back to familiar venues is business as usual. And Canadian MPs were denied entry into Israel. A Canadian delegation of MPs was denied entry into Israel, reportedly due to concerns over their previous engagements and positions on Israeli-Palestinian issues. I mean, obviously, this makes perfect sense. A group of Muslims was just shooting up Jews, so yeah, I'm not surprised that Israel did not want to allow a bunch of Muslims from Canada into the country. No one should be shocked by this, really. And that rounds up our headline roundup for tonight. And that's it for our show. Thank you for listening once again, and we'll see you next week.